In this lesson, we are going to discuss the 7 characteristics of all living things. If you recall, we've already talked about whether something is living or not living. So here you see some examples of pictures. So look over those and think to yourself, is it living or non-living? So we have clouds, yeast, mushrooms, the water and rocks, a yellow fish, a flower, and a cobweb in grass. So if you said the following answers, you are absolutely correct. We are also going to be talking about this experiment, Reedy's experiment, where they used to believe that living things came from non-living things. So here you see steak in a jar, and there's 3 different types. There's an open jar, there's a jar with a lid, and then there's a jar with like a mesh top to it. So obviously the jar with no lid, the flies got inside, they laid their eggs, maggots developed on the meat. The tightly sealed jars, no maggots developed on the meat. And the jars covered with the cloth, the maggots were on the cloth. So you are going to actually be doing this experiment later in the week. So our desired result for this lesson is to identify all 7 characteristics of life. So let's learn them. All living things are made of cells. We know that the cell is the smallest living unit that can carry out life processes. Here you see some different types of cells. Single-celled organisms are unicellular, and they make up most organisms on Earth. They have everything they need to be self-sufficient. Now we are looking at some different multicellular organisms. These cells specialize to perform certain functions like bone cells, skin cells, muscle cells, root cells, and leaf cells. Second characteristic is all living things use energy. The sun is the main source of energy on Earth. It makes light that is used by plants. We all know that this is called photosynthesis. So the plant traps the energy of the sun, makes glucose, which is a sugar, in that process called photosynthesis. And we, consumers, get our energy from the plants. The third characteristic is that all living things respond to a stimulus. So we respond to immediate and long-term changes in the environment. So for example, when it's cold, we shiver. Some animals' fur will change colors in the winter. And we know that plants will bend toward the light. So, some other examples. Dogs will pant when they're hot to cool themselves down. When there's less light, our pupils will dilate, which means get bigger to let more light in. We sweat when our bodies get too hot. And one that everybody probably knows because you've done it at some point in your life, if you touch a hot stove, your reflexes will pull your hand back. Then there's also the fight or flight reflex. The fourth characteristic is that all living things reproduce. In order for a species to survive, reproduction must occur. It can be sexual, meaning two partners, or it can be asexual, which would be an organism reproducing on its own. With asexual, there's three types. The first is budding, done by hydra and sponges. The second is fragmentation, done by starfish. And lastly, binary fission, done by unicellular organisms. The fifth characteristic is all living things grow and develop. Growing means getting bigger. And in order to get bigger, remember, the cells need to multiply, not just grow larger. So in order to multiply, they must first divide. So develop means to change into an adult form. The sixth characteristic, all living things change to fit their environment, otherwise known as adapt. Organisms must adapt to changes in their environment or risk becoming extinct. Adaptations occur over long periods of time. Here you see an example of a turtle and a cactus. Here are some examples of adaptations. The seventh and final one is all living things have DNA. DNA are the instructions for making proteins, and proteins are the building blocks of cells. So it carries the genetic material from parent to offspring. So here we see some examples of characteristics of life being described. Reproduction in the first one, cells in the second one, adaptation, response to stimuli, energy, and grow and develop. So remember, if someone asks you to give an example of something living, dead, or non-living, living organisms have to show all 7 characteristics of life. Dead organisms once showed all 7 characteristics, but not anymore. And non-living do not have all 7 characteristics. So remember, you need to be able to identify all 7 characteristics of life. Thank you.